with words for heaven and for earth, sea and sky. At last did the Maker from the living world make men, immutable as the substance of the earth, with souls made of dream and idea, hope and fear, endless possibilities. Then the Maker said, "To you, my second-born, I grant this gift. In your heart shall burn an unquenchable flame, all-consuming and never satisfied. From the Fade I crafted you, and to the Fade you shall return, each night in dreams, that you may always remember me." Hello, my dear students. In today's lecture about the history and lore of Thedas, we will explore the most numerous and widespread race on the continent of Thedas: humans. Different tribes, ethnicities, nationalities, religions, and a lot more differentiate the humans of Thedas, and this is what we will talk about today. Taller than the dwarves, and more well-built than the elves, humans vary in ethnicities, skin colors, and backgrounds depending on habitat and place of origin. Their versatility as a species has made them the most numerous and populous of all the major races on the surface of Thedas. And there is seldom a rare feat, unique exploration, scholarly achievement, or fascinating work or craft that a human have not explored or specialized in. The majority human nations of Thedas, the Tevinter Imperium, the Anderfels, Nevara, Antiva, Rivain, Orlais, Ferelden, and the city-states of the Free Marshes, have all evolved from their ancient tribal roots into separate, unique, and interesting cultures. They are a wide mix of kingdoms, empires, oligarchies, and much more. Though many of them are feudal by nature, there are still a lot of differences, and the bands of Ferelden have in practice little in common with the scheming nobles of Orlais, besides the fact that they are both upper classes. The Ferelden's fondness for the Mabari dogs, the Navarans' fascination with death, the brutal blood magic used by Tevinter magisters, the details and eccentricities of these different nations and cultures will be covered in future lessons. For now, let's start with an overview of the history of humanity in Thedas. While it is unknown exactly where the first humans came from, and the fact that there are numerous theories among scholars on the matter, one of the most common of these theories about the origins of humanity is that humans came from and migrated to the rest of Thedas from the northern island of Pre-Veilguard. This is corroborated by mainly two things. First, that there indeed existed a prehistoric human civilization on Pre-Veilguard, exemplified by the enormous pyramids built deep within the rainforests of the island. These structures stand to this very day, and is a testament to this ancient society. The second thing that makes this theory viable is the fact that this is the predominant belief of the elves and their Dalish descendants. As we have mentioned in previous lectures, both elven and dwarven sources confirms that there existed a time in Theodosian history where there existed no humans on mainland Thedas, and that the continent were only inhabited by elves and dwarves as sentient races. Furthermore, elven and later Dalish lore states that humans arrived specifically from Pre-Veilguard, from the north to mainland Thedas. Now, as we know at this point, much of elven history have been lost throughout the ages, and there is a possibility that what is left of it in modern Dalish lore are preconceived notions passed down through the years, with little thought given to the actual veracity of the information. Still, humans arriving from Pre-Veilguard is a more plausible theory than most others, given the substance and credibility of its sources. When humans first arrived in Thedas, in the year -3100 Ancient, according to Elvish records, it is believed that they arrived as one huge tribe, known as the Neromenians. The exact reason as to why the Narromenians had migrated to Thedas is still a mystery, but their arrival were met by mixed reactions from Thedas' elven population. Although many of the later human tribes managed to more or less coexist side by side with the elves, as exemplified in the lecture on elves concerning the ruins in the Brazilian forest, early contact with the Narromenians often resulted in skirmishes and raids from the native elves. It was at this time believed, and still believed to this day by many elves, that it was the arrival of the humans that caused the elves to turn from immortal beings into mortals, the quickening as it was called. We now know that this was not the case, since the mortality of the elves came as a result of the creation of the Veil. But the belief that the mere presence of the newly arriving quicklings, the human Shemlen, resulted in the loss of their immortality led to many elves leaving the lands they had inhabited for so long and distancing themselves from the humans. This in turn made it possible for the Narromenians to expand, and for humans to eventually spread across the rest of Thedas. As the Narromenians settled along the coast of the Nosen Sea in northern Thedas, other human tribes split off from the Narromenians and settled in other parts of the continent. The Planacini tribe moved to central and eastern Thedas, the Kyriani and Inghirsh tribes traveled to the southwest, and the Alamari tribe would journey all the way to the southeast and settle there. Many of these tribes were split into or would later split into smaller tribes or be absorbed by larger human tribes either by assimilation or through conquest. The remaining Narromenians in northern Thedas splintered into 4 separate kingdoms: Narromenia, Barindur, Quirinius, and Tevinter, around the year -1700 Ancient. Unity would be achieved 500 years later when Darinius of Tevinter, supported by his dwarven allies underground, united the remaining kingdoms into the Tevinter Imperium in -1195, or year 0 in the Imperial Tevinter calendar. The Tevinter Imperium generated quite a unique culture over the coming centuries, one based largely around the use of magic and whether you could wield it or not. Tevinter society were structured into social classes, where your status as a citizen is valued on how much magical power you can wield. Its ruling body of government, the magisterium, became focused on magical abilities and thus became a so-called magocracy. Slavery also became a part of Tevinter society, along with the worship of a number of strange and draconic deities, known as the Old Gods. These Old Gods were said to have been the entities that had taught the ancient Narromenians magic, and also to have given Tevinter the forbidden art of blood magic. With Darinius at its head as the nation's first archon and ruler, he and his successors started the meteoric rise of the Tevinter Imperium, punctuated by the alliance he established with the dwarves of Calshirok in -1200 and the resurging conflict with the elves. The realm of Elvenan was fought against during the Imperium's expansion east towards the Arlathan forest, and in -975 Ancient, the capital of Arlathan falls to the blood magic of the Tevinter Magisters, ushering in the slavery of the elves under the dominion of Tevinter. Over the following centuries, the Imperium, bolstered by their elven slaves, funded by their dwarven allies, fueled by their mighty mage magisters, and reassured in their faith in the old dragon gods, conquered almost the entire continent of Thedas. The Imperial Highway, a road constructed of magic and stone, would spread from north to south, and the culture of the magocracy spread and left its mark on the history of the world. Despite some political upheavals and civil wars within the Imperium, as well as stiff resistance from local tribes like the Alamari and Avars in the south, throughout the centuries Tevinter would conquer and rule supreme over the entire continent. The age of Tevinter hegemony would however come to an end eventually. The first blight spread to the surface in -380 Ancient, which strangely enough erupted only some years after a very costly blood magic ritual was performed in Tevinter in -395 Ancient, involving hundreds of sacrificed slaves and used lyrium, in which a group of magisters attempted to physically enter the Fade. Though eventually stopped and driven underground again, the darkspawn of the Blight ravaged and destabilized the Imperium as well as the rest of the surface for almost 200 years. This, coupled with the emergence of the Prophet of the Maker, Andraste, and her exalted march against the Imperium in -180 Ancient, which caused not only major slave rebellions but also regional upheavals, proved to be too much for the once mighty realm. Tevinter submitted to the new faith of the Maker after the Exalted March, and during the coming years were not able to muster military forces enough to prevent many of its former domains from revolting and declaring independence. More on this later in the lecture. As the Tevinter Imperium's hold on the rest of the continent collapsed, many regions would revolt against the Imperium's rule to try to gain their own independence. The nations of Ravain, Antiva, the Anderfels, Navarra, and the city-states of the Free Marches can trace their burgeoning independence to this period of history. One of the major historical events of this period also, after the decline of the Tevinter Imperium, was the creation of the Empire of Orlais by its first emperor, Cordelius Dracon, in -3 Ancient, and the creation of the Chantry, the Church of the Maker, which in turn led to the crowning of the Church's first religious head, the Divine Justinia I, in the year 11 Divine. Emperor Dracon established the Chantry and the Faith of the Maker as a legitimate religious institution in Thedas, as well as laying the grounds for other institutions, like the Circle of Magi, by banning the use of magic outside the auspices of the Chantry. This, along with many other religious cementations, caused a schism of faith between the Chantry and Tevinter, who had their own version of the Chant of Light, resulting in the creation of the separate Imperial Chantry that has its own divine and refuses to accept the divine in Orlais. This conflict of faith have persisted up until modern times in Thedas. This also will be discussed further later in the lesson. The southern Alamari tribes of Thedas would eventually also form a nation of their own, with the creation of Ferelden under Calenhad Therin in the year 542 Exalted. The histories of the major nations of Thedas will be covered in future lectures, and suffice to say that although the coming ages would involve many conflicts, blights, upheavals, and happenings, humans would rise to become the most numerous and ambitious race on the surface of Thedas. This ambition, however, has had its downsides throughout history, for humanity is not only splintered culturally, but also certainly religiously. The rough politics of old empires like Orlais and Tevinter, coupled with the resentment of previously conquered nations like the Anderfels, the Free Marches, and Ferelden, also makes for unstable borders and a constantly shifting political landscape. The arrival of the Kunari 300 years ago, and their recent conquests, also signals a new contender for power in Thedas that threatens humanity's hegemony. Though that hegemony is absolute for the moment, it is also undeniably puzzling that humanity can maintain such strong power over the continent, while at the same time being so fractured and prone to infighting. This is a topic that scholars have pondered for ages, and I will not promise a simple answer to the question in this particular lecture, but with the insight of what we now know of the summarized history of humans on Thedas, and with future lectures ahead of us, we might come a bit closer to an answer to this ancient question. The religions and belief systems of the humans are as unique, numerous, and fascinating as the humans themselves. Faith is important for the everyday human of Thedas, regardless of nation and creed. Here follows some of the most important religions throughout humanity's history and in modern-day Thedas. The oldest organized human religion known to us is the faith of the Old Gods. Mainly a Tevinter religion, the faith of the Old Gods has its origins in the Neromenian tribes before Tevinter unification, that later spread throughout Thedas with the conquests of the Imperium. The faith was enforced and thrust upon conquered peoples who often reluctantly had to worship these gods instead of their own traditional gods, spirits, and deities. The Old Gods' pantheon consisted of 7 powerful high dragons. It is said that during the time of the Neromenian tribes, the Old Gods called to humans in their dreams from the Fade, gifting special mages called Dreamers with magical abilities and the use of blood magic. Thalcion, rumored to be the first dreamer able to walk the Fade without the use of ritual or lyrium, were said to have been gifted the knowledge of blood magic by the old god Dumat. Thalcion and other dreamers, after their encounter with the Old Ones in the Fade, were able to display impressive magical feats to their fellow humans. The Neromenians had held dragons in high regards even before this, worshipping them as their fallen heroes reborn in new powerful bodies. So it was not difficult for the Dreamers to convince the early Neromenians of their faith, as the Dreamers became the first leaders and priests of this faith. When the Tevinter Imperium was founded years later in -1195 Ancient, the religion of the Old Gods were strongly established in northern Thedas, and the first Archon of the Imperium, Darinius, named Thalcion an honorary Archon for his great deeds. Darinius also founded the ruling body of government in the realm, the Magisterium, from the numerous priesthoods of the Old Gods. Each Old God had their own aspects that defined them and what they governed over. The 7 Old Gods were as follows: Dumat, the Dragon of Silence; Zazakel, the Dragon of Freedom and Chaos; Toth, the Dragon of Fire; Andoral, the Dragon of Unity, Chains, and most importantly, Slaves; Urthemiel, the Dragon of Beauty; Razikael, the Dragon of Mystery, and the only known female Old God; and lastly, Lusican, the Dragon of Night. The Old Gods were worshipped at everything from simple altars and shrines to great temples, each dedicated to one of the 7 deities. Besides the veneration of all the Old Gods from the general populace, each dragon had its own worshippers and priesthoods, headed by a high priest of one of the Old Gods. The gathered group of all of the 7 high priests, the foremost religious representatives of the Old Gods and their faith, were known as the Magisters Sidereal. Worship of the Old Gods often included the gifts of magic that they had supposedly gifted onto their faithful, in particularly the performance of blood magic rituals in honor of the Old Gods. The dragon gods were also honored with many festivals and holidays throughout the calendar year, many of which we talked about in our previous lecture on chronology, calendars, and the passage of time. These festivals, that many modern Theodosians still celebrate, although not in honor of the Old Gods anymore, were Tevinter in origin and named after the Old Gods. Winter's End was known as Urthalis, after Urthemiel, celebrating the end of winter with games and tourneys in the proving grounds of Minrathous. Summer's Day was Andoralis, after Andoral. All Souls' Day was called Funalis, and was named in veneration to Dumat, and Saturnalia was lastly dedicated to Zazakel. After the first Blight and the spread of the Chant of Light, the worship of the Old Gods diminished in Thedas. In modern times, the faith is almost completely extinct, with the Chantry having zealously persecuted any surviving cults of the Old Gods throughout the years. One of the major reasons for the lost popularity of the Old Gods can be attributed to one single discovery. Apparently, it would seem that the high dragons leading the 5 destructive blights that have occurred throughout Thedas' history, called archdemons, were in fact the dragons worshipped by Tevinter as the old gods. They were physical dragons slumbering underneath the surface of the continent that had been found and corrupted by the taint of the Darkspawn. Currently, there are still some secretive cults dedicated to the last 2 old gods that have yet to be found by the Darkspawn, and there is still a lot about the old gods and their connection to the Blight that we do not know about. We now move on to the Chant of Light. This is one of the most influential human religions in the world, centered around the monotheistic belief in a creator god known as the Maker, and his prophet and bride, Andraste. The Church of the Maker is known as the Chantry, and the holy text of the Chantry is the Chant of Light, a collection of histories, songs, hymns, and prayers about the faith and the world according to the religion of the Maker. The Chantry teaches that the Maker is the supreme deity of this world that created both the Fade and the physical world, with all the creatures and peoples within them. The humans, however, started worshipping the old gods instead of him, and so the Maker abandoned the world of Thedas up until a woman named Andraste came into the picture. Andraste was said to have been born around the year -203 Ancient, in what would later become the nation of Ferelden. During her life, she apparently experienced prophetic dreams about the Maker, and how the world was really constructed. According to the Chantry history, the Maker fell in love with Andraste, and offered to take her away from the physical world and make her his divine bride. Andraste, however, was reluctant to abandon her own family and husband, and instead proposed that the Maker return to the world and turn it into a living paradise. The Maker agreed to this if Andraste could convince the peoples of the world to follow the true faith and reject other religious beliefs. In this holy endeavor, the Maker vowed to use his divine powers to aid Andraste against those who would stand against her. Andraste agreed to this and was henceforth known as the prophet and bride of the Maker, preaching his word wherever she went. One of the core principles of this new faith that Andraste spread to her faithful was that magic was a terrible gift meant to serve man and never to rule over him. She also proclaimed that one of the old gods that was worshipped at the time was the archdemon that had spread so much destruction during the First Blight, and that the Magisters of Tevinter was responsible for the Blight in their false worship of the old gods. This struck a mighty chord with the common people of southern Thedas and beyond, who had been under the rule of the Tevinter Imperium for centuries, and Tevinter's callous use of magic and their worship of the old gods created fiery resentment among the new worshippers of the Maker. As we have mentioned before, Andraste started her exalted march against the Imperium in -180 Ancient, with her mortal husband Maferath at her side as general. She led her armies of Alamari tribesmen, converts, and freed slaves to victory after victory, performing miracles on and off the battlefield. The armies pushed as far as the Tevinter capital of Minrathous, and to the west of the city on the Valarian fields, the army of Andraste won a hard-fought but decisive victory against the Tevinter armies in -171 Ancient. It was after this point, however, after the peak of the Exalted March's success, that tragedy struck the cause. According to Chantry canon, Maferath had become increasingly jealous of his wife, particularly her betrothal to the Maker, but also because of all the influence and power that she now wielded. In secret, Maferath had made a deal with the Tevinter Archon Hessarian to hand over Andraste in exchange for a truce. Andraste was captured and brought to Minrathous, where she was burned alive at the stake, as punishment for daring to stand up against the Imperium. It is said, however, that Hessarian pitied Andraste while he saw her burning in agony, and decided to end her suffering by killing her with his sword. Why Hessarian did this is still disputed, as he himself later claimed that he heard the voice of the Maker ordering him to do so in his head, and that he had become a follower then and there. Others claimed that Hessarian converted purely out of political reasons, so as to better handle the growing cult of Andraste in the future. After her death, it is said that Andraste ascended to the side of the Maker, who now once again sits and patiently waits for Andraste's followers on Earth to fulfill her mission of converting the world to his worship, so that he one day can return. Andraste's remains, her ashes, was smuggled out of Tevinter by her disciple Havard to be brought back to her homeland, what would later become Ferelden, but their final resting place are still a mystery. Maferath ruled the lands conquered during the Exalted March for more than a decade, but, with his betrayal still a secret, refused to go to war with Tevinter to avenge his wife, which greatly angered his people. It is said that he, despite his betrayal, felt enormous guilt for what he had done against his wife, whom he had loved very dearly. When Archon Hessarian, after many years, openly proclaimed his conversion to the Maker and started his project of converting Tevinter to the new religion, he also made Maferath's betrayal public, which caused Maferath's own sons to overthrow him, and dividing his holdings among themselves into what would later become the nations of Navarra, Orlais, and Ferelden. Maferath disappeared from the pages of history after this point, and his name is forevermore synonymous with jealousy and betrayal. The Chantry teaches 4 core principles to the faithful of the Maker. Firstly, that magic is a corrupting influence in the world, a terrible gift that must be used to serve man and not to rule over him. Secondly, that it was humanity's pride that led to the darkening of the Golden City in the Fade, the supposed seat of the Maker, and the creation of the Darkspawn. Thirdly, that Andraste was the one and only bride of the Maker, and that her martyrdom and prophethood must be honored and remembered for all eternity. And lastly, that mankind must seek to repent from their sins for the Maker's forgiveness. Only when all peoples, not just humans, sing the praise of the Maker and join the Chantry will the Maker return to the world. The beliefs of the Chantry revolves around repentance from guilt, penance from pride, and the spreading of the good word to all peoples, following the examples of Andraste and the Chant of Light. The official icon of the Chantry, the sun, symbolizes its ultimate goal for the world. A world where all peoples of all lands under the sun sings the praises of the Maker. The Chantry holds its religious services in buildings known as chantries, with larger cathedrals being located in many major cities. Smaller chapels are common in the rural countryside or, more often, as a part of non-religious buildings. Here, the faithful can receive spiritual guidance and blessings. People can find shelter for the night if they are poor beggars or weary travelers. In each religious building of the Chantry, a sacred fire is kept and tended. Since Andraste was burned alive and believed to have ascended to the Maker's side through holy flames, fire has become a significant religious symbol in the Chantry. Bonfires are, for example, lit during some holidays to honor the prophet's memory. The dead of the faithful are cremated rather than buried, and as mentioned, a sacred brazier is kept in every place of worship. Grandest of these is the world-famous Holy Brazier in the Grand Cathedral of Val Royeaux in Orlais. The clergy of the chantry is ruled over by the Divine, the spiritual leader of the faith of the Maker. She oversees the spreading of the chant of light from the Orlesian capital of Val Royeaux and its great cathedral. Below the Divine in rank are the Grand Clerics, who are in charge of the religious administration of a certain country or larger region. The Grand Clerics are also required to travel to Val Royeaux upon the death of a divine, where they, through the Grand Consensus, unanimously must select a new divine. Most often the new divine is chosen from the ranks of the Grand Clerics themselves, but there have been rare occasions where this has not been the case. Below the Grand Clerics there are the Mothers, the local priests of the chantry. They tend to the spiritual needs of a smaller community than the Grand Clerics, like a city, a village, or a chapel. If a mother is tied to a specific chantry building, then she is known as a revered mother. Below the title of mother, there are the lowest and most numerous members of the church, the brothers and sisters. These are split into 3 separate categories. Clerics, who specializes in scholarly and academic pursuits. They are afforded a good education and often become wise scholars and archivists. Then we have the initiates, who have taken their first steps to become part of the clergy proper. And lastly, the affirmed, who are lay brothers and sisters who have chosen to live and work for the chantry and its religious purpose, but who themselves have not taken any vows yet. The brothers and sisters are the large mechanism that makes the chantry work day by day. Gender and the importance of certain gender roles have a key role in the religious structure of the chantry. The clergy is, for example, exclusively female, and no male members of the chantry is ever allowed to rise above the title of brother. This is because the chantry believes that women are the fairer and purer of the sexes, more fit for religious purposes, mainly because the prophet Andraste herself was a woman. Men, on the other hand, are still judged by the betrayal of Maferath in the eyes of the chantry. They are seen as too irresponsible, devious, and passionate to have any leading roles in the chantry when it comes to spiritual matters. There are of course exceptions to this, examples like the High Chancellor of the Divine herself, who is male, and also members of the Templar Order that I will get to in a short bit. Most of them are men who have prominent positions within the chantry. But as for the clergy specifically, human males along with other races like the elves or dwarves are overall excluded from becoming priests. This is quite a fascinating, and some would say outright hypocritical and counterproductive doctrine, since the chantry states that the Maker will not return to the world until every people on Earth, not just humans, but elves, dwarves, and even the most stubborn of Kunari, sing the praises of Andraste and the Chant of Light. The other races are, however, from the chantry's point of view, seen as further removed from the Maker than humans, due in most part to the worship of their own gods, philosophies, and ideologies. Saintly and virtuous members throughout the chantry's history, who have been willing to give their lives and die for their faith in the chantry's holy wars, the Exalted Marches, are known as Exalted Ones, zealous individuals who are said to be granted a special place at the Maker's side when they fall. And sometimes, the illustrious title of Anointed is granted to special servants of the faith who have gone the extra mile in their service to the chantry. Examples of anointed figures throughout history are Hector, one of the original disciples of Andraste, and Emperor Dracon of Orlais, who founded the modern chantry. As we have seen throughout this lecture, human history, and certainly the history of the Chantry, has been shaped by the influence and attitudes towards magic. And since one of the Chantry's main credos is that magic is meant to serve man and never to rule over him, certain organizations exist in human society in order to make it so. These two organizations are the Circle of Magi and the Templar Order. The Circle of Magi is an institution controlled by the Chantry, responsible for finding humans and city elves with magical abilities, and teaching them how to use their magic safely and responsibly. The training of mages are practiced in often remotely built structures known as Circle Towers, that works as academies, archives, and repositories for arcane knowledge and objects. Many Circle Towers have been built in Thedas over the centuries. Apprentices are given a thorough education in the magical arts, but also in other scholarly subjects like botany, herbalism, and history, their education easily the equal of university scholarships. A circle is overseen by a first enchanter, the leader of the mages in that specific tower, and below them are the rest of the circle's approved mages, the senior enchanters who serve as advisors to the first enchanter, and then the enchanters who act as teachers to the apprentices. To become a fully fledged mage, apprentices must, after years of introductory studies, pass a test known as the Harrowing, which will put their magical control and abilities to the test. If they are successful, they become fully sanctioned mages of the Circle. Mages are, however, highly restricted during their years as apprentices and newly fledged mages. Most apprentices are brought to the Circle as children, taken away from their families and forced to spend much of their childhood studying at the Circle. Regulations on contact with the outside world vary greatly from circle to circle, but many towers limit the apprentices' possibilities to leave the tower, and even fully fledged mages often need academic or other important reasons to leave the Circle premises. Those who practice magic outside of the Circle, or who attempt to flee the Circle towers, are marked as apostates, reprehensible and lawless mages that are seen as a danger to normal society. Overseeing the circles, and always on the lookout for magical abuse, apostates, or unsanctioned magic, is the Templar Order. This is the military arm of the Chantry, and one of the few ways that male initiates can become high-ranking members of the Chantry. Many Templars are stationed in Circle Towers, where they oversee the mages inside, to make sure that no unsanctioned magic is being practiced, and to protect not only the mages inside from themselves, but also to potentially protect the outside world from the dangers of the mages inside the towers. Apart from this, the duties of the Templar Order is to uphold the Chantry's laws that magic exists to serve man and never to rule over him. Thus, a Templar's duties not only involves bringing new apprentices to the Circle Towers, but also to hunt down escapees from the towers, along with neutralizing other threats like dangerous apostates, spirits, demons, magical abominations, and especially mages who practice forbidden magical arts, like blood magic, known also as Maleficarum. The subject of magic in and of itself, along with the mages and Templars, is a big one, and will have to get lectures of their own in the future. Even before its inception, there have been religious disagreements within the human Chantry. Nowhere is this displayed clearer than in the counterpart of the Southern Orlesian Chantry, Tevinter's Imperial Chantry. 10 years after the death of Andraste, in -160 Ancient, Archon Hessarian publicly revealed to the world that he had heard the voice of the Maker when he ended Andraste's life, and that he now was a devout disciple of Andraste and the Maker. With this, he also revealed the betrayal of Maferath to the rest of the world. Throughout the following years, Hessarian enacted a series of religious reforms where he sought to turn Tevinter into a nation that followed Andrastianism. The priests and magisters of the old gods were given an ultimatum to either convert or die. However, nearly all of them refused conversion and resisted Hessarian along with their followers. Hessarian, on the other hand, managed to gain huge support from the lower classes of Tevinter, who had lived under the yoke of powerful magisters for so very long. A period of upheaval and rebellion took place that would later be known as the Transfigurations, in which Hessarian finally came out on top. As both Archon and leader of the new Chantry, Hessarian made it so that the temples of the old gods were rebuilt into the precursors of the Circle of Magi, institutions of magical scholarship and learning. Seen as a hero of the common people ever since, Hessarian molded Tevinter religion and society into the first Andrastian nation, an exalted state, more than 100 years before the foundation of the Orlesian Chantry. The primary divider between the Imperial Chantry of Tevinter, as it would be known, and the later Southern Orlesian Chantry, is their vastly different views on magic and its role within the faith of the Maker. One of the core commandments of Andrastianism is, magic must serve man, not rule over him. The Imperial Chantry interprets this commandment as an appeal to not allow magic to be used to control the minds of others. The best way for magic to serve man is for it to serve the state and the rulers of man. Therefore, magic should, according to the Tevinter clergy, on both grounds of faith and governance, have a role in religious life as well as in society at large, as well as in ruling the nation. The imperial version of the Chant of Light also reflects this, with parts of the religious text negatively inclined towards magic being removed or having been altered to suit the Tevinter version better. Additional canticles, not recognized by the Orlesian Chantry, can also be found in the imperial version of the chant. This, of course, goes against the more cautionary and hands-off approach that the Orlesian Chantry has to magic, considering it as a dangerous curse that must be controlled and restricted in order to be utilized at all. Another major aspect that separates the two faiths is that the Imperial Chantry allows both men and women to become members of the clergy, with no restrictions put on any of the sexes. Imperial fathers and mothers of the Chantry are also allowed to marry, something that is prohibited in the Orlesian Chantry. The Imperial Chantry even goes so far as to allow mages to become members of the clergy, as the senior members of the clergy are all members of the Tevinter Circle. Magic is even performed openly during imperial services, and religious holidays are celebrated when the internal flames of the chantries are reignited. The Imperial Chantry even has its own divine as head of the organization, a reaction to the Orlesian Chantry condemning the imperial clergy as heretics. This imperial anti-divine, called the Black Divine in southern Thedas, also holds a seat along with the other Grand Clerics of the Chantry in Tevinter's governing body, the Magisterium. The Imperial Divine is, like its southern counterpart, usually chosen from among the ranks of the Grand Clerics, but are here selected through majority rather than consensus, with the Archon holding the deciding vote in the event of a tie. During the time of Archon Hessarian, non-mages were able to become clergymen for the first time in Tevinter history. And while this is still the case, as more and more of the old magisters converted to the faith of Andraste, the clergy has today largely shifted back to majority magic users, as a testament to the long-standing tradition of powerful mages in Tevinter society. The Imperial Chantry reveres Hessarian as a hero of the faith, and the most important disciple of Andraste, and the anniversary of his death is marked as a religious holiday. This level of fervent reverence for Hessarian is, unsurprisingly, not found elsewhere in Thedas for the executioner of Andraste. Another Imperial-specific religious holiday is the feast day of the Visitations. This is a holiday celebrating the many supposed appearances of the blessed Andraste in the dreams of many Tevinter mages. This phenomenon goes back to the days of the Transfigurations, with many mages joining Hessarian's side and converting after supposedly having met Andraste as they traveled in the Fade in a state of dreaming. This shows the Imperial Chantry's focus on spiritual repentance for mages, which is both a reflection of Tevinter society and its religious and spiritual history concerning magic. Last but not least, Tevinter is considered the Holy Land by its people, since Andraste herself died here, and for the fact that it was here in Tevinter that the faith of Andraste first took form as an organized religion. The Orlesian Chantry have, since its foundation, been at odds with its imperial counterpart, renouncing its followers as misguided sheep led astray by an ignorant shepherd at best, and despicable heretics at worst. Several exalted marches have been launched by the Orlesian Chantry against Tevinter in order to bring these heretics to the right side of the Maker's Light, yet all of them have failed to do so. This has only cemented the Imperial Chantry's role as a distinct interpretation of the Chant of Light. While the majority of religious customs of the two faiths are the same, some issues seem to be too important for the Imperial Chantry to give up. Besides the Chant of Light and the faith of the Old Gods, other human religions exist in Thedas. One of these is the beliefs and myths of the Avar people. These tribesmen can trace their ancestry back to the first Alamari tribes who crossed the Frostback Mountains into what would become the nation of Ferelden, and later settled in said mountain range. Their faith and gods are thus influenced by this unique habitation. The Avar faith is a polytheistic and animistic one, with many spirits of nature and heroic warriors of myth being worshipped alongside a pantheon of higher gods. The three main gods revered by the Avars in this way is Korth, the Mountain Father, the Lady of the Skies, and Hakon Winter's Breath, and they are the patron gods of the mountains, skies, and war, respectively. Often events in nature and everyday life is attributed as messengers or auguries from the gods by the Avars, as the Avars believe that it is only by the benevolence of the gods that they are able to survive the harsh climate of the mountains or prevail in battle. Though the belief of an afterlife exists in Avar faith, it is not a well-defined one. Death is the domain of the Lady of the Skies, and burials are carried out by dismembering the corpses so that the birds of the sky will eat and pick up the body parts, and they are then believed to carry them up to the heavens. There it is said that the deceased will be reunited with their ancestors and their past family. But it is also believed that some people, like mighty warriors, heroes, and special individuals, are destined to be reborn into new bodies upon death, so that they can continue their great deeds in a new form. The plethora of different languages associated with humans are as diverse as the humans themselves. Most humans of Thedas speak what is known as the Common Tongue, a language that can trace its origins back to the Alamari tribes of the early humans. This is also the language most spoken in majority human nations. Some sources also claim that the Common Tongue, or Trade Tongue as it is also called, was first invented by the dwarves. so that they would be able to trade more efficiently with the surface world. There are also nationally and regional specific languages, like the Orlesian language, that has mostly become supplanted by the common tongue and are often spoken currently in more secluded communities. Or Tevene, the official language of Tevinter that, like Orlesian and Dwarven, also have been largely replaced by the common tongue, yet it is still used by a sizable minority, especially many Tevinter citizens of higher social status. There are also ancient and dead languages of humanity, no longer in use by the populace other than perhaps ceremonial or traditional purposes, such as Ancient Tevene, the predecessor to the modern Tevinter language. This language that we mentioned briefly in our second lesson about the passage of time and calendars have given names to many of the night sky's constellations and the months of the year, as well as still being used in magical education concerning certain spells or phrases. These are just a couple of examples of the many different human languages of Thedas. From humble and splintered beginnings, humanity has climbed the ladder to become the dominant population on the surface of Thedas. Mankind's nations are the standard of the continent, and their cultures, as well as the human-dominated chantry, shapes the hearts and minds of the continent's inhabitants. Rivalries and conflicts still exist between peoples, nations, and faiths, but in the face of great adversity, conflicts, blights, and wars, humanity can unite into a force that few can stand against. That will be all for this lecture. Be sure to read up on all the different human nations of Thedas, because that will come in handy in future lessons. Until next time, I have been Professor Absalom, and I will see you in the next lecture. Thank you very much for watching this video. And I would also like to wish everyone a belated Happy New Year. I thought I would be able to get this video out before the holidays, but alas, I was swamped by things to do and didn't get the opportunity. But here it is. So I hope the new year will be a fruitful one for you. I hope that everything you wish you get done, you will get done. I hope you'll have a productive new year. I would also especially like to thank everyone who have subscribed during the past couple of months. We are closing in on 1,000 subscribers, which is, once again, it's insane that so many people have shown their appreciation for these videos, and I humbly thank you. It's really cool that we are soon, hopefully, going to hit 1,000. I don't know what kind of... I'm thinking of making some special kind of video, because it's quite a milestone. Some kind of special video to mark the occasion. But I think I'll think of something. I think it'll be fine. After this, I'll start working on the Kunari video, and after that, I think the Kunaris will be very fun to delve into, and after that, I'll just follow the schedule that I talked about in the last update video. So until then, thank you very much once again for watching and subscribing. So please like, subscribe, share the video around, leave a comment for the almighty algorithm gods so that they might bless me with good views. And until next time, have a good one.